That is the Commonwealth Secretary General, all the way live from the UK, Patricia, Scotland. Good morning, Madam Patricia. How are you?
Good morning, asante sana.
Very well. Karibu. Tunasema hapa mambo shwari, hakuna matata. Now, would want to know from where you sit as a general secretary, Commonwealth Secretary General. What role is the Commonwealth playing in as far as Kenya's, economy and socio-economic development is concerned, given this current uncertain times of COVID-19?
Well, the first thing I think is to understand the Commonwealth is made up of 54 countries. 32 of those countries are small, but many of them are developing and developed. So we have some of the biggest countries in the world, some of the smallest countries in the world, and lots of the different sizes of economies. And of course, Kenya is a very, very important member of this Commonwealth family. And the Commonwealth is joined by many things. We're joined by history, we're joined by the common law, we're joined by having similar parliamentary structures, similar institutions. And these factors have made us incredibly close and active as a family in terms of our rules and what we stand for, what we believe in, and what our values are. So at this time of real difficulty between our countries in terms of facing the COVID pandemic, the climatic crisis that is affecting all our countries, and the economic consequences of those two intersecting, it's been even more important that our family comes together. And Kenya has been such an active member in the recent past, but has always contributed. Kenya leads, for example, in the Commonwealth Blue Charter Action Groups. We created the Blue Charter to deal with the climate issues in relation to our oceans. And in that regard, Kenya has made an amazing contribution on sustainable blue economy, which aims to develop an integrated approach to the sustainable use of the ocean resources for economic growth, improved livelihood, and ocean health. And Kenya is a number of 3 working groups, or clusters we call them, under the Commonwealth Connectivity Agenda on digital connectivity, regulatory connectivity, and physical connectivity. If we are going to bounce back after the onslaught that has happened as a result of COVID, because our economies have slowed down considerably because of the inability for us to move from one country to another, and has really impacted our economy, we're going to have to get that connectivity back in place. And there's so much that Kenya has been able to do to assist us. You know that Kenya was one of the first to invest in the digital economy. As a result of Kenyan development, we have M-Pesa, which has made a huge impact in enabling us to come together and to use the opportunity for moving money in a way that's swift and effective. So Kenya has been incredibly important to the whole family, but has been very, very instrumental in bringing about innovation and change. And of course, now that Kenya has to be congratulated for joining the Security Council, and she was given one of the 4 countries on the Security Council who are part of our family, this is even more important. So Kenya's status for us in the Commonwealth has become even more and more important.
Very well. Now, Madam Patricia, we understand, maybe you can just take us through the outcomes of, the summit on Commonwealth on leaders on how to tackle COVID-19. What are the outcomes of that particular summit?
Well, as you know, COVID has had a devastating impact on the whole world. And we know that business will never be as it was before this pandemic hit us. In fact, our lives will never be the same. I can't think of any country, almost any family in our world today who has not been affected in one way or another by COVID. So many of our countrymen and women across the globe have died, and the sadness that has caused. has been palpable. So really last Wednesday, our member states wanted to come together to really look at the impact that COVID had, but also what are now going to be our solutions, because trade has been affected, health has been affected, and we had already held a Commonwealth health ministers meeting as on the margins of the Commonwealth meeting. We had a health meeting in the looking at what we should do in relation to COVID. And the meeting that was held, therefore, last Wednesday received considerable support because the majority of Commonwealth states wanted to come together in solidarity to ask some questions. How have we suffered? What has worked? What hasn't worked? How can we work together to repair some of this damage? And member countries across our Commonwealth are facing unprecedented challenge, emergency and its economic and social ramifications. So the combined with the long-term threat of climate change has potential to push our member states into a period of significant crisis if swift and coordinated action is not taken. So our countries came together last Wednesday to talk about, so what are those steps that we can take together? And then in the meeting, they allowed the countries across the Commonwealth to explore and exchange those solutions. And the things they talked about was the technological tools that have helped in combating COVID-19 and the role of good governance in supporting the fight against the disease. And how do we accelerate the cooperation on trade and finance so as to mitigate the economic impact of COVID-19 and the urgent action that we need to take to address the long-term impacts of climate change, and for the Commonwealth to take the lead in building a vision for a freer, more equal, kinder, and collaborative world. And Kenya's foreign minister made a huge contribution, and I think her words were so impactful on all of the members. And the meeting also observed that when Commonwealth family acts together, our joint action changes the lives of our people forever. And the meeting really wanted to concentrate on these multilateral approaches and how we can bind our countries together, especially to support the vulnerable members, such as the least developed countries, the landlocked developing countries, and the small and the developing states. And this was an extraordinary meeting because it enabled us to remind ourselves that we truly are a family, and that if my family need to be well, if my loved ones need to be well, then your loved ones need to be well too. And working together to see how that could be done was so important. There are so many advantages to the way in which Commonwealth works together economically. And we really wanted to see how we could take advantages of those economic opportunities that now are available to us.
Very well said. Issues of trade cooperation, especially just to benefit all members across board. Now, recently, we've seen the IMF revised downwards, Kenya's economic outlook, given what is happening, with the COVID-19 disruptions. And from where you sit, is this the same? What outlook does, or how does Kenya look in as far as the Commonwealth is concerned?
Well, Kenya has an extraordinary contribution to make. The economic outlook for all of us as a result of COVID is now a challenging one. But for the Commonwealth overall, there are a number of advantages. Now, we know, as you said, that the global trade is taking a significant hit. The WTO projects between 12 and 32% fall in the merchandise trade alone, depending on how the recovery unfolds. Just over 80% of the exports of our African members are in merchandise goods, so they are particularly vulnerable. And for example, Kenya's export of flowers has been adversely affected. Farmers had to destroy most of the shipments of roses prepared for Mother's Day celebrations in Europe. And you can see how painful that was, not just for Kenya, but all those countries who have always enjoyed the beauty of the Kenyan blooms. Now, beside remittances, flowers are the second biggest source of foreign currency, and Kenya's flower export earnings therefore could drop by almost half to $571 million or lower this year. Now, that's a shock. And I know that the IMF has just updated its forecast for growth this year, and the global GDP is going to be worse, and it's now expected to decline by 4.9% this year. But the overall issue, though, is by coming together, we can actually try to buffer and support each other. Because the last time there was this terrible economic crisis, when the Commonwealth came together, we were able to help cushion each other. Because while the overall outlook for world trade growth is subdued, there is some room for optimism in the case of the Commonwealth because of our rising trade and investment. In the post-financial crisis between 2010 and 2018, the Commonwealth exports of goods and services grew at a faster rate, that's about 8%, than the world average of 5.5%. So that the Commonwealth services growth was particularly robust, and services exports increased at a rate of 8.8% compared to 5.6% for the rest of the world. And that, together with the digitalization, I think it does offer us tremendous opportunities for growth in services and to support economic recovery post-COVID. And Kenya, of course, is one of Africa's leading economies in which digital trade and digital innovation, including fintech, has really taken a leap forward. So we are hoping that we will really be able to take advantage of the Commonwealth advantage, because that Commonwealth advantage is significant. We have a 21%, we do 20% more work together, trade together, we're faster, we're cheaper, and we're easier. So we are going to drill down, finding how we can accelerate that economic advantage that we have and taking advantage of all the things that are now there for us, particularly the way in which Kenya is exciting the world by some of her innovations in fintech. So there's a lot for us to do. There are big struggles, but I think coming together as a family, we are so much stronger. We've done it before, and I think we're going to have to do it again.
We have to do it again. That's a message just saying. But now, as we come to a close, what is your take on the ongoing mass protest, in the UK and the US, over the murder of George Floyd, issues of racism? We've been having a trending hashtag over the last few weeks, hashtag Black Lives Matter. What's your take on that?
Well, I think one of the wonderful things about our family is we are multilingual, multiracial, multi-religious, and we come from literally the 5 regions of the world. But what the Commonwealth has been able to demonstrate is, irrespective of our colour, our religion, our creeds, the Commonwealth as a family, we genuinely love each other. But also, this Commonwealth has always stood up against racism. You'll remember it was the Commonwealth who was the first, at a time in the 1960s when racism was rampant in every country, it felt. It was the Commonwealth who stood out and said we would not accept the apartheid regime in South Africa. We included the work in the 1970s by the statements the Commonwealth continued to make. And when we met last week on Wednesday, the solidarity that came from the Commonwealth was absolutely clear, that we would not accept discrimination on grounds of race, and we wouldn't accept a discrimination on any of those unfair and destructive ways of discriminating against each other. And this strong Commonwealth voice against racism, the fact that we will never surrender to the racists, was really, really important. And I think there is a moment now for all of us who love freedom, who love peace, and who love each other to make it clear that this will never be part of our future. We've tried everything we can to eradicate it from our past. But I think one of the most important things we have to do is we have to stand together in solidarity, because this form of racism can poison the institutions, can poison our countries. And we have to be really clear that that will never be part of our Commonwealth way. And our collective refusal to turn a blind eye to apartheid and to turn a blind eye to racism, and our tireless fight for the small and the vulnerable and the marginalized have made us a pioneer for diversity and for equality. And I think for everything that we do, we have to make sure that we are unequivocal in our rejection of the sort of violence and destructive approach that has killed so many of those we love, but will kill our children's future if we do not stand up against it now. So I'm proud that in our Commonwealth and the statements we made on Wednesday, the whole Commonwealth was united in our stand. And I think that that has given us a beacon in the world, because if we 54 from 5 different regions, small ones, big ones, poor ones, rich ones, landlocked island states, if we who represent 1/3 of the world with 60% of our population under the age of 30, if we stand together for goodness, for peace, for love, for friendship, irrespective of race, I hope that can be a beacon for other regions to follow. But we must never give up, and we must never ever be silent, because if we are silent, then evil may have a chance to thrive. So we in the Commonwealth say, not in our name, and I'm very proud of that.
Very vocal when it comes to issues of climatic change. So from where you sit, what maybe you just can give us a highlight in regard to policies and modifications that would help member states just mitigate on the adverse effects of climate change going into the future.
Well, as you know, the Commonwealth has always been committed to this issue on climate change. In 1989, the Commonwealth was the first international institution to come out and say that climate change posed an existential threat, particularly to the small and the vulnerable countries. And so just as when COVID-19 hit, we created the Coronavirus Resource Center in order to help our countries to know how to combat coronavirus, we have done something very similar in relation to climate change. And we have not only committed ourselves to addressing the issues in the sea, and we've spoken earlier in this program about our Blue Charter, yes, which has pooled all the commitments that we have to safeguard our oceans into one place, and then created the action groups to address things like how we get our plastic out of the oceans and how we enhance the opportunities to use our mangroves and protect our corals. But we're also looking at land, because you know that Kenya has been affected so badly, even this season, by floods and locusts, and the climate change is causing so much challenge. So what we have done is we've come together, we've created the Blue Charter, we're in the process of creating something we're calling the living lands, to look at the degradation of our lands, the issues in relation to drought in terms of desertification and land management. But we've also created the Climate Finance Access Hub, because so many of our countries who want to mitigate, who want to adapt, do not have the money in order to enable them to do that, and neither do they have their science. So what we have done is we've created the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub already. We've had more than $33 million distributed to our countries, but we've got about 500 $175 million in the pipeline to help countries to mitigate and to adapt. But we're also looking at space because we created something called common sensing, where we come together with the United Nations bodies, UNITAR, UNISAT, together with the UK Space Agency and the Met Office, together with also universities like Portsmouth and our Climate Finance Access Hub. And through this data, through the science that we're getting from the space agencies, we're able to look at the specificity of what is coming our way. So we've already worked to help predict the cyclones that happened in the Pacific. And now we're turning our eyes to see how we can help the countries in the Caribbean who are about to brace themselves for potentially one of the worst seasons, hurricane seasons, that we have yet had, with a 33% increase in that. But we know that all of us are going to have to come together, because as our seas get hotter, these cyclones and these hurricanes are getting bigger and bigger, because the ocean normally used to act as a coolant, reducing the incidence of these issues. But now the sea is so hot, it's feeding these hurricanes, it's feeding these cyclones. So they're getting bigger and bigger and more dangerous. So the Commonwealth's knowledge, pooling the knowledge of what works, what doesn't work, and then sharing that knowledge has made a real difference. And we are doing everything we can to share that knowledge to support our countries. So we better protect each other going forward. But we also know that there is the blue economy and the green economy. So we're trying to take advantage of this, and combining it with the use of technology and fintech. We hope that there will be more opportunities, not only for us to meet COP26 aspirations, the Paris agenda for climate change, but also helping us to support the economy as well.
Now, as we come to a close, Madam, Patricia Scotland, you happen to be the 6th Commonwealth Secretary General and the 2nd Secretary General from the Caribbean, as well as the first woman to hold the post. When looking at, women in leadership positions, as a close, your take as to, this is the 21st century. Are we seeing a change, in leadership positions for women? And what you have to say about your industrious career going forward?
Well, I think one of the things that is quite clear, and we saw it in the finance crisis we had before, that countries, businesses do better when men and women share that responsibility of leadership. And you've seen it in Kenya, because of course your president, Uhuru Kenyatta, has always been a great champion for women. And he has some wonderful ministers in his government, the foreign minister, the minister of defense, and the wonderful minister for sport. Just 3 examples. But then you also have the minister responsible for administration. And Professor Kobia, who has led the Women's Ministers' Affairs meeting for the Commonwealth. And we held the Women's Affairs meeting in Kenya last year, has asked for us to hold another so that we can look at the outcome of COVID. And then your wonderful finance minister came to the Wednesday meeting. And then Amina Mohammed, of course, for sport, is going to be hosting our sports ministers meeting later in July. Now that is a sign. Kenya is showing the sign of wonderful women's leadership, and we have women's leadership in Rwanda, where 67% of the government are women. What do we know? Women have empathy, women have passion, women have opportunity. And our world is made up of just over 50% women and just under 50% of men. So how can we deprive ourselves of the intelligence, the passion, and the wonderful talent that women and men have? So I think this is a time for women and men to join in partnership, joint leadership, and I think women have a lot to offer. And if you look at the ministers in Kenya, they are magnificent. Monica, Rachel, Amina, Margaret, brilliant ministers. And I think your president shows real taste and style in the fantastic women that he has chosen to help him lead Kenya.
Thank you very much. That is Right Honorable Patricia Scotland, the 6th Commonwealth Secretary General. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.